Custodes Powerscaling makes no sense. Like, not even a little bit. One minute, they're taking out Swarm Lords, the next, they're getting killed by Harlequins. The Custodes are supposed to be the pinnacle of martial perfection, stronger, faster, and deadlier than almost anyone in the galaxy. But here's the problem, folks. Across 40k lore, their power level is simply all over the place and truly makes no sense. So of course, your favorite autistic power scaling fallen cow is here to dive into the silliness of the Custodes and their power level in today's installment of Power Scaling Peeps. In this episode, we'll break down how powerful the Custodes should be and examine the many inconsistencies across established canon that make them appear either far weaker or far stronger than they actually are. Get ready to jump into the power scaling cowhole, folks. Say it with me. It's time to power scale. The Custodes are the personal bodyguards of the Emperor of Mankind, the closest thing the Imperium has to perfect augmented soldiers. Where Space Marines are mass-produced genetic super soldiers, the Adeptus Custodes are crafted one at a time. Every Custodian is an individual masterpiece, a warrior engineered and refined to a standard nothing else in the Imperium even comes close to. It's often said that a Custodian is to a Space Marine what a Space Marine is to an ordinary human. And honestly, I feel like that's underselling it. Custodians are simply in a completely different field. They're playing baseball and the Space Marines are playing field hockey.
Huh?
Custodians are built through a lengthy process which entails personalized gene alchemy, biological sculpting unique to each Custodian, decades to centuries of training, and direct influence from the Emperor's own design philosophy. Their bodies are enhanced in every measurable way. Strength far beyond Astartes' limits, speed and agility described as literal golden blurs, reflexes that border on precognition, and skill gained from hundreds of years of continuous combat drilling. Then we get to their durability, and this is where the Custodes really get to flex. In Master of Mankind, we see a Custodian fighting even while missing half his face. He had lost half of his face. His helmet had been wrenched clear, taking a significant section of the back of the warrior's skull and brain matter with it. Yet, the Custodian was fighting on. The fact he still stood with those wounds defying reason. This was during the assault on the Webway after days of non-stop fighting against demons and Chaos Marines, which is, simply put, insane endurance. Additionally, according to the 9th edition Custodes Codex, every Custodian carries a spark of the Emperor's own power, manifesting as a supernatural warding that turns aside bullets, diverts blades, and causes psychic powers to sputter into nothing. So on top of being incredibly enhanced, they're literally baked with a portion of the Emperor's power. Then we get to their gear, which is as ridiculous as them. Standard Custodians are equipped with Oromite armor, superior to even Terminator armor, handcrafted to deflect bolter rounds and even tank plasma hits. They also have Guardian Spears, masterwork weapons, combining power blades with integrated, high-caliber guns that can easily cut down Chaos Astartes, Heretics, and Xenos with ease. However, they do have some weaknesses, as we see in the book First Heretic. They're not brothers, Argyltal said. Watch how they move. They're lions, not wolves, hunting alone instead of as a pack. Custodians fight alone, not as coordinated squads like Space Marines, which means they can be brought down by a group of warriors, like we see later when Argyltal and the Gal Vorbak take down a group of Custodians. Outside of this though, they appear to be near perfect fighters. Now that we've established how powerful the Custodes should be, let's scale them against the broader 40k universe. First off, they are definitely below Primarchs. A Primarch is still a demigod, and depending on the Primarch, it would probably take 10 to 40 Custodians to bring one down. So for example, it may take 5 to 10 to bring down Alfarius or Omegon, who are probably the weakest Primarch out of all 19 of them. And then it would probably take anywhere from 30 to 50 to bring down the dueling masters of the Primarchs like Lionel Johnson, Fulgrim, Jagatai Khan, Angron, or Sanguinius. Now Magnus, on the other hand, it may take even more than 100, but That's if Games Workshop isn't writing it. What about the rest of the 40K universe though? To help me figure this problem out, let me bring out the trusty Cow's Power Pyramid. We're going to be briefly using this to help scale the Custodians against the broader 40K universe. I promise in the future I will do a full, longer, more artistic version of this video, truly asking the question, how powerful are the Custodians? But for right now, we're going to keep this section very brief, because we're here to talk about the stupidity of Custodes Powerscaling, not how powerful they are. Custodes are probably above Chapter Masters, Orc War Bosses, Chaos Lords, Grey Knights, Tau Commanders, and Drukhari and Craft World Champions. But they probably struggle against Phoenix Lords, Greater Demons, Primarchs, and most likely Demon Princes, which would put up a rough fight against the Custodians. Realistically, if we're using a Gauss Power Pyramid, the Custodes sit at the top of the enhanced tier, just below Demon Princes and well below Primarchs and Greater Demons, but above all the other champions in the Chapter Master and enhanced tier. If we're talking about Demon Princes, it would probably take anywhere from 3 to 6 Custodians to take down a Demon Prince, depending on that Demon Prince's level. But like typical 40K power scaling, none of this consistency actually shows up in the lore. Their portrayal is all over the place. So now let's dive into the many inconsistencies with them and why it makes absolutely no sense. So from my analysis, we can place the Custodes below Primarchs, but above almost any other mortal entity in the galaxy. But before we jump into the examples of how Custodes power scaling makes no sense, let's first lay out some perfect examples of how Custodes should be written. The first example comes from, surprise surprise, the masterfully written Master of Mankind, where the Custodes are correctly shown as the enhanced warriors they truly are. The Custodes could simply overpower their enemies immediately through superior strength, speed, and armament. Instead, they learn from each and every fight. They adapt and learn how to combat new foes in real time. Ra exemplified this. He would parry twice or thrice, whether it was a sword, axe, fang, or claw, following his enemy's movements with brief flickers of attention, then lashing back to impale, to cleave, to sever. According to the data streams, no legionary had yet lasted more than 3 blows against his advance. Overall, the War on the Webway presents the Custodians as perfect. All 10,000 of them fight in this war, and by the end of it, there are only 1,000 left. As throughout the heresy, they have held back an endless horde of demons, chaos marines, and other warp creatures. They are enough to stop the flood for a moment, but even with Big Daddy E's intervention, the war is lost right before the Siege of Terra begins. This shows that they are the greatest warriors of the Imperium, but even they have their limits. If they were less powerful than a Chapter Master or a Space Marine, they would have fallen within weeks rather than lasting years. And if they were beyond Primarch level, they would have been able to outright push the demons back, thus showing that the Custodians and Master of Mankind are written perfectly.
I gotta tell you, it was perfect.
Then we see another example of this in the book Godblight, where the Custodians and the Primarchs are perfectly balanced. Colquhoun attempts to fight at the Primarch Guilliman's side, but quickly realizes a cold truth. We're supposed to be guarding him, said Varsilian. He had recently completed his 5th century of service and taken the honor robes of the Wardens. He needs no guarding, Tribune. Guilliman cuts through the machines of the Death Guard as well as their troops like paper stage props. And privately, Colquhoun concedes that Varsilian has a point. There is nothing in that chamber that could even slow the Primarch down. And remember folks, Guilliman is not even one of the strongest Primarchs, at least in prowess. So in both of these examples, we see the Custodians as they should be written. Far beyond Space Marines with ease, but significantly, at least on a 1-to-1 scale, below the Primarchs. This is how the Custodians should be portrayed. But in these next few examples, I'll show you how Games Workshop does not exactly follow this same train of thought. but let's start with a piece of lore that somehow makes them seem even more godly than everything we just established. In the novella Duty Unto Death, 6 Custodians fight against millions upon millions of Tyranids, an entire splinter fleet, including a Swarm Lord, and by the end, 5 Custodians are dead, but 1 Shield Brother survives. Right away, there are 2 massive problems with this. 1, the writers always forget the Swarm Lord is a goddamn psyker. Nobody ever remembers that the Swarm Lord is supposed to be a very powerful psyker. It can do everything a Zonothrope can do and more, but in this novella it never uses any of its psychic powers because that would get in the way of whatever power armored protagonist needs to look cool. It's like writing Mephisto or Armin so they can only stab people. Absolutely brilliant. The second issue is, how is this feat even possible? This is a feat that might actually be beyond a Primarch, yet the Custodians still cut down millions of Tyranids, a whole splinter fleet, lictors, Zonothropes, and yes, a Swarm Lord. There's even a moment earlier in the book where a Zonothrope, a creature literally built to stay far away and blast things with psychic lightning, just decides to run into melee range and instantly die. Because, of course it does. For context on how powerful a Swarm Lord should be, they are an ancient bioentity with thousands of years of experience, a master strategist, a veteran of potentially millions of battles, and is equipped with 4 power weapon equivalents, and wields terrifying psychic power. Realistically, it should be roughly equivalent to the biggest monsters in the setting, greater demons, solitaires, or maybe even Primarchs. So what does this all mean? What we see in Duty Unto Death places the Custodians at probably low Primarch tier and maybe even beyond that. Far beyond what their usual scaling suggests. 6 of them wiping out an entire Tyranid splinter fleet, killing millions of Tyranids, including a Swarm Lord, and still having 1 survivor, that simply does not make sense when compared to the rest of 40k lore. So now, let's flip the script and look at the feats that make the Custodians appear like the cast of the Muppets. And of course, you already know exactly where I'm going with this. The Harlequins, specifically Throne World, from the Beast Arises. Here's the context, fellas. The Eldar decide they need to warn the Emperor about chaos. Fair enough, reasonable, sensible. But instead of sending a psychic message or a telepathic vision or literally any other method they've used for 10,000 years, they decide the best plan is, hey, let's go storm the Imperial Palace and slaughter a bunch of Custodians until we get an audience. Ah, genius. In the most secure location in the galaxy, during the era when the Imperium is at an absolute maximum paranoia while a giant orc attack moon is literally hanging over Terra.
I may not have a brain, gentlemen, but I have an idea.
Truly, Games Workshop, you've outdone yourself. Outside of being one of the stupidest pieces of fiction in existence, the result is the Custodians look downright pathetic. The Harlequins basically speedrun the palace like they're doing a no-hit Elden Ring run. They're flipping over entire shield lines, carving through anyone who steps close, and shrugging off everything else. It takes hundreds of Custodians just to put down a couple of clowns in bedazzled spandex. You get silly scenes like Harlequin guns splitting Custodians apart, a Shadow Seer somersaulting through entire phalanxes of Custodians, Custodians dying from the gene toxins melting their insides, a Custodian matching a Harlequin speed only for her to salute him and immediately decapitate him. And of course, through it all, they are screaming friendship. And for what? It has to be an insanely important message, right? A critically important message that justified carving a golden blood-soaked path through the most elite warriors in human history. It's gotta be really important. But no, it's not. The message reads, hey, don't forget chaos exists. That's it. That's the message. At that point, it's not just bad power scaling, it's terrible writing. The book treats the Harlequins like untouchable anime protagonists and the Custodes like disposable NPCs from Skyrim.
I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow in the knee.
Completely contradicting everything else 40k has ever established about either faction. It's a scene that genuinely should not exist. To show how stupid this is, let's talk about how strong the Harlequins really are, and then compare them against the Custodians. Harlequins are insanely quick, agile, and accurate. They're armed with bizarre tech and wear gear that makes them nearly impossible to target. Their masks project pure psychic fear, their flip belts let them ignore gravity, and their hollow suits distort their image into a swirling storm of colors that screws with even machine targeting. Their arsenal is absurdly lethal, fusion pistols that melt tanks, neural disruptors that scramble your brain, the Harlequin's kiss that liquefies you from the inside, and the caress which literally phases into your body and pulls out your organs like it's shopping day in the produce aisle. Now, I'm not saying Harlequins are not powerful, they are extremely dangerous. But in a fair 1v1 duel on neutral ground without any context involved, the fight would be incredibly even, as a Custodian is stronger and more durable, while a Harlequin is faster and more agile. They are fundamentally designed to counter each other, the ultimate speed versus strength matchup, making them each other's closest and most dangerous counterparts from their respective races. This essentially means that it makes no sense that the Harlequins are plowing through the Imperial Palace like it's a fun run for charity. So here we see the Custodians look like the equivalent of a guardsman, while previously they were able to tear through a whole splinter fleet. The duality of men, ladies and gentlemen, the duality of men. Although both of these points support my argument that Custodes Powerscaling makes no sense, because how are we going to powerscale a Custodian when they lose to a Harlequin at one point and then are able to take out a whole splinter fleet at another? Yeah, I'm scratching my head too. But folks, we're not done. If you thought Throne World was bad, buckle up, because the Outcast Dead somehow manages to make the Custodians look even worse. In this book, a completely uncorrupted, unarmored World Eater, just a baseline legionary mind you, manages to snap a Custodian Guardian Spear with his bare hands, trade blows with the Custodian like they're in a bar fight, crack the Custodian's armor with punches.
That's some old bullshit.
And it gets a lot worse. He punches straight through the Custodian's chestplate and then rips out his spine through the front of his torso. The fight escalates from, okay, this is an interesting duel, to what the fuck is happening? The moment Togor literally catches a Custodian fist and headbutts him hard enough to break his nose and cheekbones, then punches clear through his armor. You know, the super metal described in the 9th edition Custodes Codex to be harder than ceramite, more resilient than adamantium, able to withstand las cannons, meltablasts, plasma blasts, demon claws, you name it, and is simply put the most advanced power armor in the Imperium, crafted for the Emperor's own bodyguards. And suddenly a World Eater Sergeant who's unarmored without power armor in his bare hands just punches through it. It's completely inconsistent with literally every other depiction of Custodes' durability in 40K. We have one more example that paints the Custodians as absolute jobbers, this time from the book Watchers of the Throne. In this scene, the chamber is being torn apart, minotaurs smashing columns, debris everywhere, and we watch as a Custodian is dragged down by just 2 minotaurs, his spine twisted into an impossible angle as plasma fire webs around them. On paper, this should not happen. A single Custodian is supposed to be capable of tearing through multiple Space Marines without breaking a sweat, operating on a completely different tier of strength, speed, and technique. Yet here, they're portrayed as barely above Astartes, getting overwhelmed by only 2 Minotaurs. While Minotaurs are quite strong Space Marines, they should not be anywhere close to Custodes' level in martial prowess. It's another example of the wild inconsistency that makes Custodes Powerscaling feel completely incoherent. Now, there are way more examples than just these 4, but I'm not trying to make this video a gazillion hours. When you line these examples up, the problem becomes impossible to ignore. Depending on the book, the Adeptus Custodes are either low Primarch demigods capable of erasing entire Tyranid splinter fleets, or they're barely above Astartes speed bumps who get folded by Harlequins, World Eaters, and even regular Space Marines on a bad day. They swing wildly between the Emperor's perfect guardians and elite jobbers whose sole narrative purpose is to make someone else look cool. In reality, Custodians should exist in a clear, stable tier, decisively below Primarchs, but definitively superior to Space Marines, Chapter Masters, and almost every other mortal force in the galaxy. They should not be punching bags, and they should not be one-man apocalypses either. But because Black Library has never enforced consistent scaling, the Custodians end up as whatever the plot needs in that moment. Gods when the enemy needs to lose, and disposable trash cans when the protagonist needs a win. And that's why Custodes Powerscaling is fundamentally broken. Honestly, the Custodians have become the Imperium Swarmlords, terrifyingly powerful in theory, but whenever the plot demands it, they're just there to make someone else look good. This uneven scaling not only undermines their reputation as the Emperor's golden boys, but also makes it very hard to gauge their true power in 40K. And that, folks, brings us to the end of today's dive into Custodes Powerscaling. From mind-blowing feats to utter jobber moments, the lore paints a wildly inconsistent picture. But one thing is clear though, these golden oiled up boys deserve better. I will be returning home to the farm for Christmas, so there may be a lack of content at a certain point, either at the end of December or the beginning of January. But I am actively grinding away to make sure there is content until I return. Shout out my Patreon and YouTube memberships, Ritter S and Bossy Paul, Keydree, Jack Mentel, Musty, Nico149, Omar, Chris, Soap Tastes Okay, and Nathan. Stay milked, fellas, and I'll see you in the next video.